I believe that scientific system of how we actually do research in universities and all of this kind of stuff is largely broken. And it's not because I don't think that good research is getting done and it's effective and all of that kind of stuff. And in fact, it's probably the opposite thing. I think of it as a system that is based on competition and hierarchy, and that there is all these rankings that happen within the university system. Everybody's well aware of these rankings, and anybody that's been part of the research career is going to either say that it functions quite well and they're succeeding because they are moving up in these rankings, or there's going to be a whole group of people that say that it's dysfunctional. And the way that I think about this, I think about comparisons to how we look at the economy in general. And one way that we can look at our economy is to look at the highest achievers in the entire economy. And if we look at the highest achievers in the entire economy, many economies are going to look fantastic. And they're going to look like they are performing very well. No matter what country you're in, it looks like that it is performing really well because there's extreme wealth in these particular scenarios where people have obscene amounts of wealth, or they've created some really innovative thing and they prosper a lot from that. But then there is a whole group, a mass group, the 99%, as lots of people like to talk about, that are not at the same position. And if you look at almost virtually all statistics of sort of scientific effort, moving up in the scientific game is very difficult to do, just like in real life. It's very hard to sort of climb the corporate ladder within the university system, to go from institution to institution, to go to some place that's, higher ranking than where you start off and then you also see that there is a lot of people that are one-off publications, like just one-off publication. They might have one publication in a top journal, whatever that might look like, and they never publish again. And that's the vast majority of individuals. Now, you also will talk to a huge number of people that will say the same story, that they are tired of doing research. It's hard to do and they don't actually want to do it. Now, if you're part of the culture, it's trying to get you to do more research and trying you to perform at a higher level. But the fact that there is this that happens, the fact that there's this whole culture of trying to encourage people to do more, to push ahead, to get into the elite journals and all of that kind of stuff, should say something. It should be a reflection of something that is going on. And one way you can view it is, yeah, the scientific engine is working, in that there is all the sort of stepping stones. But then on the other end, if you look at all of the other indicators and you just simply flip it around and you look at the number of people that have tried and didn't get in, the number of rejections you get, rejection rates at any leading journal, at least in my field, is like 95%. If you look at the number of people that didn't try to get tenure and didn't get it, the number of people that tried to get a PhD and didn't get it, and you add all that up, that's a substantial cost. That's an enormous cost. And, that's the challenging part that we have to look at and we have to balance, right? It's not just about the winners in a particular system that works really well, but you have to look at the costs associated with all the other people that have tried and actually didn't perform the same sort of way. That's the same way I would think the same thing with entrepreneurship or innovation. Any system that allows a lot of people to try and fail is very costly. And perhaps we should focus on that. In fact, that's a huge part of my research, is looking at, failure and trying to understand what's going on there, the cost of it. The cost of failure is enormous. Enormous. And it doesn't matter whether we have social norms that embrace failure and any of that kind of stuff. It is absolutely enormous. and it's difficult to actually get over. We focus on the sort of successful outcomes, and we say that everything's working and it's functioning the way that it should function, but then we don't focus on all the other people, all the other systems, all the other things that have tried and wasted enormous amounts of research, funds, and effort and all that kind of stuff to actually get there. So how do we change this? What do we do? I think it's not an easy solution. None of this stuff is ever an easy solution. It's easy for me to say these kind of things, right? It's easy for me to actually profess about this kind of stuff. But I think, to me, I think a simple step, a simple way to make a change is to recognize there actually is a problem that exists. And to recognize that it's going to take a substantial amount of work to get there, to make a change, to make a difference. It's the same thing as looking at all the social justice movements and all of that kind of stuff. If you look at it, the task is enormous. It is huge, and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes decades, right? So it's very much a reflection on a cultural change, a reflection on shifting from, wait a minute, we have this sort of competitive system where people are one-upping, and that's going to be very difficult to change. We're never going to change that very quickly. In fact, it's probably impossible to change in a decade or 5 decades. This stuff is enormously baked into the entire system of how it works. But what we need to think about and to really start changing is having discussions about the social norms and thinking about how things actually function. There's an enormous switching cost to go from researcher, whatever that might look like, to something else. So whatever that, maybe it's going into industry and doing something like that. The switching cost is enormous, so it prevents people from switching. So switching costs is the costs that are associated from switching from one thing to the next. And the costs are enormous typically. It means for a researcher to give up their entire career, and they might have an enormous amount of sunk cost that's in this particular career, and they're switching to go to something else. That's a difficult change to actually make. And that means that you have to admit to everybody else that you're a failure, and people just disappear. They just literally disappear because they don't want to admit to these things. They don't want to talk about it. It's not an easy thing to openly discuss. And, they really do feel bad about that, right? There should not be this response that they feel so bad about these sort of transitions from one thing to the next. So I think one thing that we could do, so besides the social norms and besides sort of making progress on that, which is impossible to change, but one thing that people can actually do is to think about meta careers or hybrid careers or things that are balancing in between and having that bleed into a little bit more. Thinking about things like institutions and having different roles in institutions. So having a research role in NBER, for example, National Bureau of Economic Research is a valid thing, or one of these think tanks are a really valid thing, and having more of these sort of meta institutions that sort of balance multiple goals. And then the other thing is to have industry actually embrace research a little bit more. There's been such a stark contrast between the two in that they're sort of fighting each other, that we don't recognize that there is a lot of great positions that are out there that are really very much research oriented. Things like Google, for example, and institutions like that, and large corporations that are doing this kind of stuff makes a big difference and makes it a profitable thing. If we see people doing more of this in many different areas and bleeding from one research career to the next, it becomes a little bit more palatable for researchers to be open to this. But it takes a lot of work. And it's not something that I can change by myself. It's not something that you can change by yourself, but it's just a recognition of, hey, why are we allowing this to occur? indefinitely. Why don't we make some progress on this and start thinking about ways that we can encourage people to be fulfilled rather than feeling stuck or within a particular position? Why don't we focus on changing the message instead of, it's interesting. Like, as a business professor, we talk about this kind of stuff in the industry world and what it means to sort of follow your career path and calling and all of that kind of stuff. But then, man, you better not talk about that in academia. That's a mistake. That's going to be problematic because that shows that you're not a true bred researcher and all of that kind of nonsense. Right? I think we need to really have these open conversations of what it means and find people that are open to it, whoever that might look like. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to be open to it, but I'm saying it's a challenge that we face. And the reason why it's difficult for me to admit it, that it's challenging for me not to be open to that, is because if you put in the effort and you were to work with somebody like a researcher and then you disappear, that researcher feels like they have to do an awful lot of work. And so that's where because you've disappeared, and that's where you need to encourage these more meta organizations, more practical experience, so you can learn how to do research, what's it about at the beginning. Maybe do internships that are possible and things like that, where you could do training that are in between that allow people to understand what it's about, but also have an outlet if they don't like it, in the sense that it's still reputable and people still understand why you're doing it. And you still maybe can actually do some research and still do okay with that. So with that, I know that it's a tricky thing to tackle, but somebody needs to tackle it. We need to start talking about this a little bit more openly. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.